You think poverty meant going hungry in our grandparents' generation? Think again. Families stretched pennies into feasts with suppers so clever and satisfying they could teach modern kitchens a thing or two about survival. Let's dig into 60 old-school poor man suppers no one seems to make anymore. Bacon-topped tomato pie was one of those strange little miracles that somehow felt fancy and frugal all at once. At its core, it was sliced tomatoes, sometimes fresh from the garden, sometimes canned, layered into a pie crust with mayonnaise, shredded cheese, and a touch of onion. On top went a lattice or crumble of bacon, the kind you saved and froze in wax paper until you had enough. Then it baked until everything melted together in a warm, bubbling mess that smelled like Sunday supper. This dish was especially beloved in Southern church cookbooks, where tomatoes were plentiful and bacon was considered a sacred ingredient. Women's auxiliaries made it for luncheons, potlucks, and summer picnics when it was too hot to cook anything heavier. It walked the line between a side dish and a main course, good enough to carry a meal if needed. Sometimes it had biscuit crusts, sometimes store-bought dough, but it always had that creamy, salty sweet thing going for it. It might not have looked elegant on the plate, but people went back for seconds. That was usually all the proof a church lady needed to call it a hit. Spiced honey-glazed ham was a special one. It was one of the first few instances we had of spicy glazes or glazes in general being used in popular mainstream American traditions. Something breaking into the platform of Sunday roasts, potlucks, casserole Mondays, and church potlucks was always a big thing. It was basically the 20th century equivalent of someone getting a contract with the NBA right out of high school or landing a Tarantino production. It was your big break, your way to get your name out there in the industry. Dishes like these were some of the first things in the world that ever popularized honey glazes, which were really just a European concept for the most part until they became as big as they are now in America. Also, people just got tired of having the same old ham they were always used to. You need to switch things up, man. Keep it interesting. Take yourself out to a dinner you really like, and ham just isn't it. I mean, for breakfast, comfort food days, and intense cravings? I'm right there with you. But there's no sense in sticking to tradition so much you ignore the good ideas out there, right? Would you say you're the type to experiment? And if so, are glazes something you'd play around with? Chicken paprikash was the creamy, paprika-soaked comfort food that looked like it belonged in a cookbook from across the world, yet found its way into suburban kitchens during the 1980s. Made with bone-in or boneless chicken simmered in a sauce of sour cream, onions, butter, and Hungarian paprika, it had warmth, richness, and depth most weeknight meals could only dream of. Served over egg noodles or rice, it became a hearty, comforting dish that families returned to when they wanted something different but still soothing. The sauce was the star, creamy, orange-red, and smoky from the paprika. It clung to every bite of chicken, every forkful of noodles. It was the kind of dinner that made the whole house smell like someone had been cooking for hours. And sometimes they had. But even the quick versions, using canned broth and pre-cooked chicken, managed to hit the mark. Chicken paprikash felt exotic without being intimidating. It was one of those dishes that proved 1980s home cooks were not afraid to explore old-world flavors with modern-day shortcuts. It was not flashy, but it was soulful. Exactly what you needed on a cold night with nothing but time and a plateful of comfort. Candle stub melting rescued remaining wax from burned-down candles to create new light sources that extended illumination indefinitely. When candles burned too low to use, families saved the stubs in containers until enough accumulated. The wax was melted together in double boilers or cans set in hot water, then poured into molds around new wicks. The resulting candles might be multicolored from combined stubs, but they burned just as well as store-bought alternatives. Some families saved wicks from old candles too, or made new ones from cotton string. The practice mattered especially in rural areas where electricity arrived late or remained unreliable. Even after electric lights became standard, candles served during outages and provided atmosphere for special occasions. Melting stubs became family projects, with children helping pour wax and position wicks. The recycled candles represented light literally created from what others discarded, illumination that cost nothing beyond the initial candle purchases that started the cycle. Barley and beef hot dish was not just dinner, it was survival food disguised as comfort. You would take ground beef, brown it with onion, and stir in pearl barley, diced tomatoes, maybe some frozen corn or green beans if you had them. Everything went into a casserole dish and baked until the barley softened and soaked up every last drop of flavor. This was a meal that stretched far, filled deep, and cost almost nothing to make. It was a regular fixture in Midwest and Prairie Church cookbooks, where hot dish meant any warm, baked, one-pan meal that could carry a family through the week. Barley was one of those ingredients that folks kept on hand even if they did not cook with it often. It lasted forever and went with just about anything. When meat was scarce or expensive, barley helped bulk things out without feeling like a compromise. The beef was there for flavor, the barley for weight, and the vegetables for whatever nutrition you could scrape together. This dish fed church families, volunteer teams, and tired mothers who just needed one night off from thinking about supper. It was humble food, but it held people together. Hog maw was even worse. This was entirely the stomach lining of a pig. That's about as disgusting as it gets, but it gets worse when you get to the rest of the recipe. You would create this mixture of sausage, potatoes, onions, and spices, and then you would stuff the stomach lining with that. This wasn't the last step, since you had to boil it too. Now, some people baked it, but boiling it typically was the way to go because the stomach lining needed to be tenderized. This was something you would see a lot in Pennsylvania Dutch communities and Southern cooking. Some regional differences were things like whether or not the entire stomach would be served or whether it would just be used as a casing. Nose-to-tail eating had become extremely popular in the early parts of the 20th century because the mentality of not wasting a single bit of the animal was what kids had grown up on. Combine that with the fact that you'd be helping Dad out by taking one for the team and eating this with a smile, and you had both a logical and an emotional reason to force yourself through this. Even that couldn't save hog maw for too long because the preparation for it was just as much of a headache as eating it was, which really just made people question what they were even doing with this recipe anymore. Teriyaki chicken with minute rice was weeknight takeout without the takeout bag. Soy sauce, brown sugar, garlic, and pineapple juice turned simple chicken into a sticky sweet masterpiece. It was cooked in a skillet or electric wok, poured over hot, fluffy minute rice, and eaten straight from the plate while steam curled into the kitchen light. It felt exotic back then, sweet, salty, and just a little tangy. Teriyaki was not yet everywhere, so having it at home felt like a treat. Bottled marinades were popular, but homemade versions became kitchen staples too. Families made it with chicken breasts or thighs, depending on what was in the freezer. Pineapple chunks were often tossed in for extra sweetness. It was not just fast, it was festive. You got a colorful plate, an easy cleanup, and a dinner that actually made you smile. It looked glossy, smelled amazing, and made your weeknight feel a little more like a celebration. Teriyaki chicken with minute rice was fusion without realizing it. It gave American families a taste of something new, dressed up in ingredients they already knew how to use. It was sweet, it was easy, and it was too good to forget. Rainwater collection captured free water that reduced utility bills and provided soft water superior for many household uses. Barrels placed under roof downspouts caught runoff that would otherwise soak into ground unused. The collected water irrigated gardens during dry spells, eliminating need to run meters for outdoor watering. Rainwater also washed hair and clothes better than hardwell or city water, requiring less soap and leaving fabric softer. Some families used it for all non-drinking purposes, reserving metered water only for cooking. The barrels required minimal investment, often repurposed containers, and maintenance meant only occasional cleaning. During droughts, families with collection systems watched gardens thrive while neighbors' plants withered. The practice connected households to natural cycles, encouraging awareness of weather patterns. Children learned that resources fell freely from sky for those prepared to catch them. Rainwater collection represented independence from utilities. Creamed chipped ham on biscuits was the unofficial supper of Pittsburgh, and it had a way of spreading from city kitchens to country church cookbooks. It was made by chopping thin slices of deli ham, usually chipped or shredded, then simmering them in a white sauce of milk, butter, and flour. The sauce was ladled over fresh biscuits, toast, or even saltines depending on what was around. It was salty, creamy, and stuck to your ribs in the best possible way. This meal started as a working-class favorite, especially in mill towns and coal country, but it worked its way into church kitchens too. It was cheap, it was easy to scale up, and it made use of inexpensive lunch meat that could be bought by the pound. During busy weeks with lots of evening programs or youth nights, it was the kind of meal that filled a crock-pot and waited patiently until everyone was done rehearsing or cleaning pews. Church ladies appreciated how little it cost and how much it satisfied. It was also one of those dishes that made leftovers feel like something special, especially when paired with sweet pickles or stewed apples on the side. Sardine whips were a dish that had the texture of a mousse but the taste of canned sardines. Whipped cream, gelatin, and cream cheese can work wonders in terms of texture, but when you throw something like sardines in there, you just ruin the whole thing. The mixture was also whipped to the moon and back until it was as light as a cloud. So, in terms of preparation, I think people did whatever they could to make this appetizing. Unfortunately, nothing can mask the stage-stealing taste of sardines, and I do not use that term in a good way. The fishy taste was way too overpowering for a lot of people, especially Americans who had grown up in the South or in places that did not have any fishing or seafood culture. What seafood people did like was typically grilled, roasted, or just fried. Gelatin-heavy party foods were also falling out of fashion, and those were just too many nails for this recipe's coffin. Baked ziti with Jared sauce was the Italian-American supper that could feed an army without breaking a sweat. It was not lasagna, but it hit all the same notes: gooey cheese, rich tomato sauce, and plenty of pasta. Ziti noodles were cooked just until tender, then tossed with store-bought marinara or meat sauce. Italian sausage or meatballs often joined the party. Everything got layered into a baking dish with shredded mozzarella and sometimes a bit of Parmesan on top. Into the oven it went, bubbling until the edges were crisp and the cheese was pulling in every direction. It was hearty, cheap, and perfect for leftovers. Baked ziti was a weeknight miracle. It could be made in bulk, served at potlucks, or frozen for later. You knew what you were getting every single time, and that consistency made it one of the most loved casseroles of the 1980s. It was red-sauced joy, one scoop at a time. Some families added ricotta, some skipped the meat, but everyone had a version. Homemade hair care replaced store-bought shampoos and conditioners with kitchen ingredients that cleaned and softened just as effectively. Eggs beaten and massaged through hair provided protein that strengthened strands while cleaning away oil and dirt. Vinegar rinses removed soap residue and added shine-rivaling commercial products. Mayonnaise deep-conditioned dry hair when left on for 30 minutes. Lemon juice naturally lightened color in summer sun. These remedies cost pennies compared to drugstore alternatives and worked reliably across generations. Mothers taught daughters the recipes, adjusting mixtures for different hair types. The kitchen became the beauty salon, with ingredients pulled from refrigerators and pantries. The practices predated commercial products and continued because they worked. Families saw no reason to spend money on bottles of chemicals when eggs and vinegar sat in every kitchen. The hair that resulted was healthy, manageable, and achieved without contributing to household expenses. Ground bologna salad sandwiches were one of those chilled, spreadable creations that popped up on church supper tables more often than you would think. You would take a chunk of bologna, usually the cheap kind, run it through a meat grinder or chop it fine, then mix it with mayo, chopped pickles, and a bit of hard-boiled egg. Sometimes a spoonful of relish or mustard got added for tang, and sometimes not. The result was a creamy, meaty spread perfect for sandwich bread, saltines, or celery sticks. It was not elegant, but it was dependable. Church ladies loved it because it could be made in advance and kept cold until needed. It showed up at funeral receptions, youth nights, and sandwich socials where the goal was to feed many and spend little. Kids liked it for the mild flavor. Grown-ups liked it because it reminded them of simpler times. You would find this recipe handwritten in the margins of old cookbooks, sometimes labeled bologna spread or sandwich filler. It was humble, a little strange, and deeply familiar if you grew up around it. Just one bite and it came right back. Since this is our last round of items before we wrap the video up, I thought I'd save some of the most horrific ones for it. Creamed brains on toast is the top contender. This is exactly what you think it is, too. It's lamb, calf, or pig brains in a sauce that does it no favors or adds any flavor. I mean, really, stomach linings, feet, ears, brains, what was up with that? I get that there really has to be some advantage, situational or nutritional, that makes all these recipes worth it. But for the life of me, I just don't see it. Brains are a really inexpensive source of protein, which is something I can get. There was also the fact that before industrial meat processing, most butcher shops would sell whole animals. So it became common for Sunday suppers to make the most of that, especially because Sunday suppers were an event that people would usually bring a very empty stomach for. Unfortunately, this dish saw very little time at any table on Sunday, because besides all the reasons we've gone over on why offal isn't something people vibed with, there was also mass hysteria about mad cow disease spreading thanks to eating brains. Hamburger pie, also known as shepherd's pie in its Americanized form, was one of those dishes that came from scraps and turned into gold. It started with a layer of seasoned ground beef, sometimes with onions or gravy, sometimes just straight from the pan. Then came the creamy corn, usually from a can, poured right over the top like it belonged there. The final touch was a thick layer of mashed potatoes, piped on or spooned roughly, spread edge to edge. Some people topped it with shredded cheddar, others left it plain. It baked until the potatoes browned at the edges and the whole thing bubbled at the seams. It was a one-dish wonder, Midwestern, humble, and filling in every way. If your family had hamburger pie in the oven, you knew you were in for something warm and grounding. It was never flashy, but it always delivered. It was especially great for stretching ingredients and feeding a family on a tight budget. The layers came together in a forkful that tasted like every corner of the plate at once. String and twine balls grew from every piece of packaging cord saved and wound together into useful spheres that served countless purposes. Before tape became common, string tied packages, secured bundles, hung pictures, and repaired everything from broken handles to torn book bindings. Families saved every scrap, winding pieces together regardless of length or thickness. The resulting balls often contained decades of accumulated string, growing large enough to fill hands. Kitchen string tied roasts and sealed food bags. Workshop twine bound tools and measured distances. Garden string trained climbing plants and marked rows. Children learned to tie knots using string from the family ball, developing skills that served them throughout life. When string was needed, someone retrieved the ball and cut exactly what the job required. No waste, no excess. The practice eliminated a recurring expense that added up over years of household operation. String balls represented physical proof of thrift accumulated one saved piece at a time. Creamed dried beef over rice was a salt-forward spin on a military classic that church cookbooks welcomed with open arms. This version took thin slices of dried beef, sometimes from a jar, sometimes packaged like cold cuts, and simmered them in a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. Instead of spooning it over toast, you would ladle it onto hot cooked rice, letting the sauce sink into every grain. It was richer, more filling, and gave the illusion of a meal even when the fridge was close to empty. The recipe came from war rationing and military mess halls but got dressed up for church kitchens and family tables. It was quick, pantry-friendly, and made a little beef go a long way. You could stretch it even more with peas or chopped hard-boiled eggs stirred in, which many housewives did when feeding more than 2 or 3 mouths. It was the kind of meal that said, "We are making do and we are doing it well." It is mostly forgotten now, but ask anyone who grew up on it, and they will tell you, it really did hit the spot. Veal kidney pie was this savory meat pie that had been filled with sliced veal kidneys. And that's every bit as metallic as you're imagining. The fact that people would try to salvage it with onions, mushrooms, a rich brown gravy, and different kinds of herbs was really just a band-aid fix. Kidneys themselves are an organ meat that have an incredibly intense flavor, much like the liver does. You mix that in with more veal meat and savory ingredients, and you're honestly just going overboard. People didn't really realize that and thought that more might be better. Well, sometimes, less is more, and this is one of those times. Veal kidney pie really wasn't anyone's cup of tea. I mean, it was popular in some Southern and African American communities, but even then, that was like farmsteaders and people who had grown up on nose-to-tail cooking. Most of the general population aside from that was very much not accustomed to such overwhelming flavors and thought that this was too gamey for their preferences, and as a result, it ended up being left behind. Salisbury steak TV dinners were the one microwave meal that felt like a real supper, at least through the eyes of a hungry kid. The beef patties were tenderish, floating in thick brown gravy next to a scoop of mashed potatoes and a rectangle of corn. Sometimes there was a brownie hiding in the corner. It was a plastic tray of small comforts. The sound of that plastic film peeling back after the microwave dinged was almost ceremonial. You sat cross-legged on the carpet, TV glowing, fork in hand. The meat may have been spongy and the potatoes from a powder, but in the moment, it tasted like everything you needed. This was independence for a generation raised on fast solutions. Your parents were busy, you were hungry, and this box from the freezer aisle gave you a meal and a few minutes of peace. The packaging always promised home style, but really, it was its own thing. Bacon grease saving transformed breakfast byproduct into cooking gold that flavored meals for weeks after the bacon itself was gone. Every family kept a tin or jar near the stove, pouring off rendered fat after frying bacon and storing it at room temperature or in the icebox. The grease became the foundation for countless dishes: frying eggs, seasoning beans, greasing biscuit pans, sautéing vegetables, and adding richness to gravies. Nothing else provided the same smoky depth that made simple foods taste satisfying. The practice continued year-round, with containers cycling through use as older grease was used and fresh grease added. Families measured wealth partly by how full their grease jar stayed. During lean times, when bacon itself was rare, the stored grease stretched that single luxury across many meals. Children grew up assuming every kitchen had a grease container because every kitchen they knew did. The fat preserved well, rarely spoiling, and required no special storage beyond keeping it covered. Ground bologna salad sandwiches were one of those chilled, spreadable creations that popped up on church supper tables more often than you would think. You would take a chunk of bologna, usually the cheap kind, run it through a meat grinder or chop it fine, then mix it with mayo, chopped pickles, and a bit of hard-boiled egg. Sometimes a spoonful of relish or mustard got added for tang, and sometimes not. The result was a creamy, meaty spread perfect for sandwich bread, saltines, or celery sticks. It was not elegant, but it was dependable. Church ladies loved it because it could be made in advance and kept cold until needed. It showed up at funeral receptions, youth nights, and sandwich socials where the goal was to feed many and spend little. Kids liked it for the mild flavor. Grown-ups liked it because it reminded them of simpler times. You would find this recipe handwritten in the margins of old cookbooks, sometimes labeled bologna spread or sandwich filler. It was humble, a little strange, and deeply familiar if you grew up around it. Just one bite and it came right back. Stuffed beef heart actually is as weird as it sounds. An entire beef heart had to be cleaned and stuffed before the dish was a meal, and while this might sound like some rich person's hobby, just collecting beef hearts to cook, it was actually a frugal meal. The heart was a very tough organ. It was covered by hard muscle and tissue that just made it very undesirable for customers and butchers alike. Most shops would discard it or sell it at a fraction of the price they were selling other things. Hence why a lot of people took to this, not out of a craving for beef heart, but just so they could stretch their paycheck a little longer. Again, nose-to-tail eating did decline, but even then, this is just as extreme as a calf's head. Why do we have to eat either the head or the heart? You tell me. Either way, I'm glad that this is out of style because I genuinely cannot imagine what I would do if I visited someone's palace and they served me a heart stuffed with cabbage, lettuce, and onions. Like, that's scary. Flour sack clothing transformed bulk food packaging into wardrobes that dressed entire families without retail prices. Feed and flour companies caught on to this practice and began printing their sacks with colorful patterns, knowing rural families would choose brands based on fabric appeal. Mothers carefully washed the sacks to remove residue, then cut and sewed them into dresses, shirts, underwear, and curtains. A single 50-pound flour sack yielded enough material for a child's dress, and 3 sacks could make an adult garment. Women traded sacks to complete matching sets, and quilting circles formed around pooling different patterns. Children wore flour sack clothing without shame because everyone in their community did the same. The fabric was sturdy, washed well, and lasted through multiple children in hand-me-down chains. This wasn't desperation dressing, it was resourceful fashion that turned waste into wardrobe. The practice continued into the 1960s in rural areas where the tradition remained practical. Shrimp and rice casserole with bell peppers was the kind of meal that felt like a small celebration on an otherwise plain weeknight. It usually started with canned or frozen shrimp, chopped bell peppers, cooked rice, and a white sauce or tomato base to hold it all together. Sometimes cheddar cheese was melted on top, but most versions kept it simple. In Gulf and coastal communities, this casserole was a church supper favorite, elegant enough to serve to guests, but easy to double for a crowd. The shrimp gave it a slight air of fancy, but it was always grounded in frugality. Families who fished brought their own catch. Others bought bags of frozen shrimp on sale. Bell peppers added color and sweetness, and the rice did the heavy lifting. This casserole was often brought to funeral meals or recovery dinners, quiet, comforting, and flavorful. It made its way into community cookbooks with little fanfare, but stayed there because it always worked. It was modest luxury baked into a 9x13 dish. Tripe and onion casserole was this slow-cooked dish that people made with beef tripe, which was the stomach lining of a cow. I know we've had some really bad casseroles on the list so far, and I genuinely am sorry for exposing you to the evils of our nation. Tripe and onion casserole was really just this slow-cooked dish that incorporated beef tripe with a vegetable butter-based broth. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what tripe is, it's the stomach lining of a cow. As you can probably guess, most of the items on the list are organ meat recipes, and they fell off badly. I've never seen something have a downfall like this. Tripe was readily available, it was practical and inexpensive, and it was also tender. This was one of the few things on the list that didn't have an immediately offensive texture, so there is always that. It still couldn't last in the long run, though, because tripe simply had too much of an aroma that I can only best describe as the scent you would associate with a barnyard. On top of that, the gelatinous texture wasn't something people were down for, and most people would instead just go for normal or better cuts of meat and ration those out according to their budget, rather than bother with recipes like this that just made them feel bad after eating. Lasagna with cottage cheese was the Italian-American supper shortcut that fed every crowd and saved every budget. Ricotta was pricey, cottage cheese, way cheaper, and almost always in the fridge, so families layered noodles, red sauce, ground beef, mozzarella, and cottage cheese into thick trays that baked into gooey, bubbling comfort. It was tangier than traditional lasagna, lighter in texture, and surprisingly addictive. The edges would get crispy, the middle would be molten, and the smell could drag anyone out of their bedroom and into the kitchen. Some people swore it was better than the real thing. Others would never admit they used cottage cheese, even if they loved the taste. But in the 1980s, this was the go-to lasagna for busy households that needed big flavor on a tight budget. It showed up at birthday parties, neighborhood potlucks, and Sunday dinners. It was easy to double, easy to freeze, and easy to love. Coffee grounds, reusing stretched morning routines across multiple days. When buying fresh grounds meant choosing between coffee and other necessities, families would brew their grounds twice, sometimes 3 times, accepting progressively weaker cups rather than waste any potential flavor. The first brew was reserved for working adults who needed strength for labor. The second brew went to older children or was mixed with chicory to maintain body. Used grounds found second lives beyond the pot, spread in gardens as fertilizer, used to scrub greasy pans, or scattered to deter pests from doorways. Some families dried and stored used grounds, mixing them half and half with fresh grounds to double their supply. The weaker coffee became normal, and children grew up not knowing any different. This wasn't about taste preferences, it was about mathematics. One can of coffee lasting 3 weeks instead of one meant money for other essentials. The grounds never went to trash until every possible use had been extracted. Turkey croquettes with gravy were one of those elegant little tricks church ladies knew how to pull off after a holiday dinner. Leftover turkey would be shredded, mixed with a white sauce or mashed potatoes, then shaped into tidy little patties or oblong logs. Some rolled them in cracker crumbs, others used cornflake dust for the coating. Then they were fried to a golden brown and served warm with gravy poured right over the top. These were not everyday meals. They were for after Easter or Thanksgiving, when the bird had been picked clean and the bones had already gone to soup. But nothing went to waste. Not the drippings, not the stuffing, and definitely not the last bits of meat. Church cookbooks from the 1950s and 1960s are full of croquette recipes, especially in regions where thrift and grace went hand in hand. These were also popular with church auxiliary groups and potluck planners who needed something warm, filling, and presentable to serve a crowd. They looked nice on a platter, they reheated easily, and they made a little leftover go a long way. In small towns and church halls, that was always worth something. If you boiled cabbage in milk, you either were pretty bad at judging what a dish would end up tasting like, or you just had a fondness for experimenting. Cabbage and milk stew was this incredibly simple dish that you would make with butter, salt, and a bit of flour for thickening, but it was just that. Simple. Delicious? Good? Palatable? None of those things. The entire idea of this was that it was cheap, healthy, and took no effort or ingredients to make, which meant that it was something that was most popular in rough times. We talk a lot about the resilience of American people through the Depression, but we don't talk enough about how glad they were to leave meals like this behind once their situations improved. Nobody liked the thought of cabbage and milk stew after a long, hard day working and laboring or taking care of the kids and managing the house. The textures were really bad. Boiling cabbage meant that it would release a really pungent aroma. The texture of this was soggy, the taste was sour and bland, and there were just better ways of being healthy if that was your thing, especially with the advent of canning things. Beef stroganoff took a hard left turn in the 1980s, and nobody was mad about it. The Hamburger Helper version was the most famous, but even homemade versions started borrowing from that quick and easy formula. Instead of strips of steak, you had ground beef. Instead of slow simmering, you had a one-pan, 15-minute meal. The creamy sauce, made from sour cream and mushroom soup or packet mixes, was poured over wide egg noodles and stirred until it looked just right. Thick, glossy, and beige in that oddly comforting way. It did not pretend to be authentic. It just wanted to get dinner on the table. This was a working parent's dream. Minimal prep, affordable ingredients, and flavor that punched way above its weight. Kids loved it. Adults loved it. Even picky eaters could get behind those silky noodles coated in savory cream. If you grew up in the 1980s, this was the taste of a weeknight. The clink of forks on Corelle plates, the hum of a kitchen lit by a single overhead bulb. It was warm, familiar, and deeply satisfying. Button jars preserved tiny fasteners that represented significant savings when clothing needed repairs or alterations. Before discarding any worn garment, families cut off every button, sorting them into jars by size, color, and material. The collections grew over years, becoming treasure troves of options when buttons popped off or broke. Children helped with sorting, learning to identify button types and imagine their future uses. When a shirt lost a button, the jar provided matches or acceptable substitutes without requiring store trips. Creative mothers used mismatched buttons deliberately, creating folk art aesthetics from necessity. The jars themselves became heirlooms, passed from mother to daughter with accumulated buttons spanning decades. Finding the perfect button meant digging through layers of family history. A single button at a store might cost as much as a loaf of bread, making the jar's contents genuinely valuable. The practice taught children that small things mattered, and nothing useful should ever be thrown away. Mock chicken legs, often called city chicken, were one of the more creative illusions that came out of old church kitchens. You would take cubes of pork or veal, thread them onto wooden skewers, bread them like fried chicken, and then either fry or bake them. They had nothing to do with chicken except for the fact that they kind of looked like a drumstick when you picked one up. This dish became a hit in the Rust Belt during the 1930s and 1940s when chicken was actually more expensive than pork. Polish and Slovak communities took to it quickly, and so did the churches they were part of. You would find the recipe in all kinds of regional cookbooks from Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. These were especially common at church picnics, potlucks, and summer weddings where trays of chicken legs would come out hot and crispy. Some cooks dipped them in gravy, others just served them plain with mashed potatoes and green beans. They were easy to make in big batches and tasted even better the next day. Church ladies loved that. It was thrifty, it was fun, and it made folks smile when they realized the chicken was not chicken at all. Frog leg fricassee was this stewed dish that would involve frog legs that had really just been browned lightly in butter. They were simmered in a really creamy sauce too, with wine, onions, garlic, and herbs. Doesn't sound bad, right? I'm sure a sizable amount of us have gone fishing for frogs, maybe even eaten a few in our lifetimes. At least our older viewers might be able to relate. The idea was basically that you would sauté meat and stew it in this white sauce, and then you would use seasonings as per your taste. Most people kept it aromatic and herbal, but there were people who tried different spice rubs as well, typically in the South and Midwest. Wild frogs also used to be abundant in rural America in general, and a lot of people just thought they were a really convenient source of protein. Frog legs were still something that French and Cajun communities ate occasionally, but many people thought it was very off-putting. Besides, amphibians are usually seen as weird. It's not the kind of meat people are used to eating. They're not even farmed that much in the United States. It's not seen as exotic, quirky, trendy, or experimental. It's just odd and strange to people, which is a big part of why frog legs fell off. You have no idea the damage bad social perception can deal to a recipe's lifespan. Jambalaya with smoked sausage brought a little southern fire into 1980s kitchens, even if you had never stepped foot in Louisiana. Some families made it from scratch, browning sausage and simmering shrimp in a seasoned tomato broth with long grain rice and Cajun spices. Others reached for the boxed kind, adding smoked sausage slices and calling it a day. Either way, it packed bold flavor into a single skillet. The rice soaked up every bit of the spicy tomato base, and the sausage gave it a smoky punch that made each bite feel special. It was not fancy, but it tasted like something bigger than it was. Jambalaya let you pretend you were cooking something exotic, even if it came together in 30 minutes on a weeknight. You could tweak it however you liked: more shrimp, no shrimp, hot sauce, bell peppers, celery, garlic. It was flexible and full of heart. It warmed you up, filled you up, and made you feel like a real cook, even if all you did was stir. In a decade full of shortcuts and pre-packed meals, jambalaya still found a way to feel fresh, fiery, and totally unforgettable. Homemade laundry soap production turned kitchen chemistry into household savings that eliminated one recurring expense entirely. Families grated bars of lye soap or saved soap scraps, then mixed them with washing soda and borax in proportions passed down through generations. The resulting powder cleaned clothes effectively at a fraction of commercial detergent prices. Some families made liquid versions, boiling the mixture and storing it in repurposed containers. The soap lacked perfumes and softeners, but removed dirt and stains reliably. Mothers taught daughters the recipes, adjusting ratios based on water hardness and fabric types. Families without extra money used wood ash lye mixed with rendered animal fat, making soap entirely from waste products. The homemade versions were gentler on fabric than harsh commercial alternatives, extending clothing life. Laundry day meant using soap made by family hands, connecting the chore to self-sufficiency values that governed household economics throughout lean years. Beef and cabbage casserole was a dish you could smell down the church basement stairs long before you saw it. It started with ground beef browned in a skillet, sometimes with onion or a bit of garlic salt. Then came chopped cabbage, tomato soup, and maybe a sprinkle of rice or elbow macaroni to stretch it. All of it went into a casserole dish and baked until the top browned and the edges bubbled up. It was not fancy, but it stuck with you. In colder regions, especially during late fall suppers and Lenten fundraisers, this casserole was a dependable standby. It filled bellies fast and had that tangy sweet tomato flavor people kept coming back for. Some church ladies added Worcestershire sauce or topped it with crushed crackers. Others swore by using V8 juice instead of soup. But no matter the variation, the soul of the dish stayed the same. Cheap beef, fresh or old cabbage, and whatever starch would hold it all together. You could cook it in the morning, reheat it in the evening, and feel good about not spending much. It made its way into church cookbooks because it was a humble classic, the kind of meal that fed people well and asked for very little in return. No, very few things on this list are as bad as this one. Liver and banana casserole was definitely an event in American history. You would combine sliced liver with bananas that had been baked in either a creamy sauce or a really savory one, and then some versions even added cheese on top of it. What people would do to convince themselves that this was tolerable was remind themselves of the fact that the liver is a superfood. You can kind of eat healthy if you treat it like any other chore, right? You get lots of good things for time spent doing something you absolutely hate. Typical job experience, right? Not even that kind of practical rationale could help this dish. A lot of people immediately realized this was an absolute catastrophe that should not ever see the light of day. Fair play to them, not every experiment is going to give you lasagna or salmagundi. But this couldn't have possibly come at a worse time. The liver was already in the public eye for its metallic taste and how bold of a flavor it had. But this was just pushing more and more supporters away from the liver fandom. Then again, if that's the price we had to pay to make sure this thing stays dead, then so be it. French bread pizza was not just a meal, it was an event. Every kid in the 1980s knew the thrill of seeing a halved loaf of crusty French bread slathered in red sauce, buried under gooey mozzarella, and dotted with slices of pepperoni or whatever toppings you had on hand. It baked quickly, smelled incredible, and had just the right amount of crunch and chew. It felt fancier than frozen pizza, more fun than takeout, and more customizable than anything else in the freezer. The sauce came from a jar, the cheese came from a bag, and the bread came from the bakery rack at the supermarket. But when it all came together, it felt like magic. Parents loved it because it was cheap and fast. Kids loved it because it felt like something made just for them. No one argued over slices because everyone got their own half. It was a Friday night tradition, a birthday party standby, and a backup plan for when real dinner plans fell through. It may not have been elegant, but it was full of joy. Bread bag shoe liners were the secret weapon against wet feet that cost nothing and worked better than store-bought solutions. When rain or snow threatened to soak through worn shoes, mothers would slip plastic bread bags over children's socks before putting their feet into shoes. The plastic created a waterproof barrier that kept feet dry through puddles, slush, and morning dew on the walk to school. This wasn't embarrassing. It was smart. Every family did it because buying new shoes or rubber boots simply wasn't in the budget. The bags were saved, washed, and reused until they fell apart. Children learned to walk carefully to avoid tearing the plastic, and mothers kept a stash of bags near the door during wet seasons. The hack worked so well that some families used it even when they could afford better options. It represented the practical wisdom of making do with what was already in the kitchen drawer. Today's waterproof socks cost $15. Back then, the solution was free and just as effective. Ham and noodle skillet was the kind of meal that came together in a single pan on a busy Wednesday night before choir practice. It started with leftover ham, cubed, chopped, or shaved off the bone, tossed into a hot skillet with egg noodles and a handful of peas. Some folks added mushrooms, others just stirred in a spoonful of sour cream or a pat of butter to keep it rich. The result was warm, salty, and filling with just enough green to count as a vegetable. You could find this dish in nearly every Lutheran or Methodist church cookbook from the 1950s to the 1970s. It was fast, forgiving, and perfect for when dinner needed to be on the table in 20 minutes flat. No oven, no timer, just a stovetop, a wooden spoon, and a skillet. That was part of the appeal. It worked for the women who had worked all day and still had a bake sale to prep for or a committee meeting to attend. Kids ate it without complaint, and men liked it because it tasted like a meal. In homes and churches where time and money were always tight, the ham and noodle skillet got the job done. The mock duck was a substitute dish for duck meat, also made in times like the Great Depression, mostly because duck meat had become such a luxury. There was a type of gluten made out of wheat known as seitan, and you would roll that and stuff it to make this. Conceptually, I think people were trying to mimic duck breasts. You would pan-fry these just like them too, or roast them and serve with any kind of gravy. Now, this doesn't really sound that bad, right? Relatively normal compared to the rest of the nightmares we've been going through. Wrong? It was made of organic meat, or strictly vegetarian ingredients, both of which were really bad at capturing the texture or flavor of duck, or just coming anywhere close to it, really. The only momentum this dish had going for it was that veganism was on the rise thanks to health concerns, overfishing hazards, and environmental damages. People were significantly more excited about real duck meat when it did eventually become affordable and accessible, and most mock food is now left behind in the past. Let's be honest, it was smart, but that doesn't mean it was good. Cube steak with mushroom gravy was tough love on a plate, the kind of dinner that tasted way better than it looked. Cube steak, tenderized into submission with a meat mallet or machine, was pan-fried and then smothered in a thick gravy made from cream of mushroom soup. Sometimes there were fresh mushrooms, sometimes not. It was poured over mashed potatoes, egg noodles, or whatever starch was on hand that night. The meat was cheap, the meal was hearty, and the result was pure stick-to-your-ribs comfort. You did not eat this with a light appetite. You ate it when you were cold, tired, or just in need of something that felt like it had weight. It was not glamorous. The gravy was beige. The meat was thin. But it hit you in the best way, every time. Families made it on repeat because it used pantry staples and kept everyone full. Even if the steak was chewy, the sauce made up for it. Cube steak with mushroom gravy was survival food turned sentimental favorite. It did not try to be trendy. It just made sure you did not leave the table hungry. Hand-me-down systems organized clothing transfers between siblings with precision that ensured maximum use from every garment. Older children's outgrown clothes moved to younger siblings in planned progressions that families tracked carefully. Clothing was stored by size in labeled boxes, ready for the next child to grow into. The system extended beyond immediate family. Cousins, neighbors, and church families participated in networks that circulated clothing through entire communities. Garments that survived multiple children became legendary, their journeys tracked through years. Nothing was discarded until it literally fell apart, and even then the fabric became rags or quilt pieces. Children grew up wearing clothes with history, sometimes hearing stories about which sibling wore what when. The practice created bonds between families and eliminated the need for new clothing purchases except when growth spurts outpaced supply. Hand-me-downs weren't shameful. They were practical community economics that benefited everyone involved. Eggplant hamburger pie was what happened when church ladies leaned into garden vegetables and budget beef at the same time. You would slice the eggplant thin and use it like a crust or a layer inside a pie dish, then spoon in a seasoned mix of ground beef, onion, and tomato. Some versions added breadcrumbs or a little shredded cheese on top before baking. The end result was something between a casserole and a meat pie, rich, saucy, and surprisingly light. Eggplant was never the star of church dinners, but in the right hands it carried a lot of weight. It was cheap, it soaked up flavor, and it came straight from backyard gardens during summer months. This dish was especially popular in regions with Italian or Greek congregations where Mediterranean cooking naturally found its way into church kitchens. But even in Midwest cookbooks, Eggplant hamburger pie made appearances as a clever, meat-stretching recipe that helped families get through a week. It was earthy and satisfying, not too heavy, and it gave women a reason to use what they had grown without spending extra. For families who did not eat out much, this was as close as it got to something special. The jellied chicken loaf was a dish that was made from shredded cooked chicken and homemade gelatin that was made via stock or Knox gelatin packets. You had bare-bones seasonings and some vegetables like cabbages or hard-boiled eggs in the loaf, and it would be served cold as an appetizer for Sunday supper. One of the reasons people would make this dish for Sunday is because it could be made in advance and it was okay to serve it cold, which really cut the work for a lot of home chefs. Plus, this recipe involved cheap cuts of meat, and it was very economical for a lot of people. In the middle of the 20th century, there was also a rise of gelatin-based aspic dishes, but lately all that's gone in the opposite direction. Most people enjoy Jell-O in purely dessert forms now or as a quick snack. There's also just a general distaste for the texture, and for the amount of effort it takes, a lot of people think the idea of a cold jelly meat dish doesn't offer enough bang for your buck. Chicken cordon bleu casserole was the shortcut supper that turned a fancy French dish into a creamy, weeknight-friendly bake. You started with chopped chicken, leftover or canned. Add in cubed ham, a few slices of Swiss cheese, and a rich sauce made from sour cream or cream of chicken soup. It all went into a casserole dish and got baked until bubbly and golden on top. No stuffing, no rolling, just the flavors of chicken cordon bleu without the effort. This dish felt grown up, but it was easy enough for anyone to make. It tasted like something from a restaurant, even if it came from a bag of shredded cheese and a can of soup. It was a go-to for potlucks, holiday leftovers, or a random Tuesday night when you wanted something cozy but a little bit elevated. If your mother ever made it, you remember how the ham melted into the sauce and how the Swiss gave it that sharp edge that kept you coming back. Tin can, reusing turned kitchen trash into household essentials that served dozens of purposes. Empty cans became drinking cups, storage containers, cookie cutters, candle holders, and planters. Larger cans stored flour, sugar, and dried beans. Smaller cans held buttons, screws, and sewing notions. Some families hammered holes in bottoms to create colanders or punched decorative patterns for lanterns. Coffee cans with plastic lids became standard storage systems in pantries and workshops. Children used tin cans for stilts, telephones connected by string, and targets for throwing games. The sharp edges were bent inward or covered with tape to prevent cuts. Families accumulated collections organized by size, knowing each can would eventually find purpose. What stores sold as specialty containers, poor households created from what arrived free with their food. The practice represented fundamental thrift, recognizing value in what others considered garbage and refusing to spend money on items that could be made from waste. Cheesy spinach squares were what you made when you wanted to sneak something green into a potluck plate without getting too many complaints. You would mix chopped spinach, frozen or fresh, with eggs, shredded cheddar cheese, and a little flour and baking powder to bind it all together. Then it was poured into a baking dish, cooked until firm, and sliced into neat little squares. They were good warm or cold, which made them perfect for women's circles, bridal showers, and youth group meetings where you could not count on an oven being available. The flavor was mild but rich, and the texture fell somewhere between a quiche and a savory brownie. These squares were especially loved by the women who brought them because they were just so easy. No crust, no fuss, just a big mixing bowl and a square pan. They showed up in dozens of church cookbooks from the 1960s and 1970s, often with hand-scribbled notes in the margin like, "Add nutmeg" or "Great with hot sauce." You might not think of spinach as a crowd pleaser, but when it came baked with cheese and egg into a tidy little square, it sure had a way of disappearing fast. Spam and lima bean casserole is every bit the atrocity it sounds, and it's one of the worst things we've ever done as a country with Spam. A salty and processed pork product that was supposed to make life a lot more convenient for everyone wasn't supposed to be used like this, and I'm glad we can agree with that. Mostly. The middle of the 20th century was a scary time because it was wrought with economic strife. Your neighbor could genuinely ruin your entire week with one of these. especially because this was supposed to be a budget-friendly meal for families. Lima beans, cream sauce, and breadcrumbs or cheese. Who could possibly think that was a good idea? Spam just used to be so available that people were making anything. And the middle of the 20th century was also a time when casseroles were slowly reviving and fusion food was slowly beginning to take off too. But this isn't the direction you go in, and I'm glad people left this in the last century. It's still not as bad as the next one, though. Quiche Lorraine somehow found its way from French cafes to American kitchens and never looked back. Made with eggs, cream, bacon, and Swiss cheese baked into a pie crust, it was the closest most families got to elegance on a weekday. It showed up at brunches, baby showers, and dinner tables alike. Equal parts savory pie and silky casserole. The bacon brought salt, the cheese brought richness, and the cream made it smooth enough to spoon. This was a dish that made leftovers feel fancy. Leftover crust? Use it. Bits of bacon? Toss them in. Quiche Lorraine was forgiving and flexible, but it always looked like you tried. That was the secret. It felt refined without being complicated. Your mother could make it while balancing a phone call and homework help. It slid onto the table golden and steaming, and everyone got a slice. No fuss. Just quiet satisfaction. In the 1980s, it became shorthand for sophistication on a budget. It may have started in Paris, but by then, it lived in Pyrex. Darning socks was the evening ritual that kept families walking on repaired fabric rather than spending on replacements. When holes appeared in heels or toes, mothers and grandmothers would stretch the sock over a wooden darning egg or light bulb, then weave thread back and forth across the gap until new fabric formed. The technique required patience and skill, creating patches that could outlast the original material when done properly. Children sat and watched, learning the over-under pattern that would serve them throughout their lives. A single pair of socks might accumulate multiple darning patches over years of wear, becoming more repair than original fabric. The practice wasn't limited to socks. Sweaters, gloves, and any knitted item received the same careful attention. Darning thread cost pennies while new socks cost dollars, making the math undeniable. Families kept darning supplies in sewing baskets passed through generations. The skill represented self-sufficiency and the refusal to let clothing die before its time. Rice ring with creamed mushrooms was the kind of supper dish that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover, but came from a 5-ingredient recipe in the back of a spiral-bound church cookbook. You would mold cooked rice, flavored with butter and maybe a bouillon cube, into a ring using a bundt pan or gelatin mold. Then you would fill the center with creamed mushrooms made from a simple white sauce and canned or fresh mushrooms sautéed in butter. It held its shape, looked impressive, and tasted warm and earthy. Dishes like this were popular for Sunday socials and women's luncheons, where the goal was to serve something filling that still had a little flair. Church ladies knew presentation mattered, especially when the ingredients were plain. Rice was cheap, mushrooms could be foraged or bought in bulk, and butter made everything feel a bit more special. This was a dish that traveled well, reheated easily, and made just enough fuss to feel intentional without being fussy. You could feed a dozen people without breaking a sweat, or your grocery budget. And if there was any left, it was even better the next day. Okay, I know you're getting just a little bit tired of hearing about the South, but it's not my fault that so many of America's best hits in the 20th century, like Southern sweet tea, are from there. Sure, they might be mostly forgotten now, but if you go just a little back into their heyday, you'll find one of the tea from the most well-detailed and in-depth cups of tea you'll ever have. While the only ones you'd find these days having a genuine cup of green tea are suburban wives who have the time to spend fine-tuning every part of their health, or men who think herbal green teas excuse pounds of bacon and beers over the weekend, Southern sweet tea became a classic for a good reason. That reason was the Prohibition, when alcohol in general was banned for 13 straight years. Back then, people didn't have non-alcoholic beverages like they do today. Sure, there was root beer, but who really cares about that besides 16-year-olds? And don't even get me started on how awful non-alcoholic wine used to be. There was one savior that was slowly making its way into the social zeitgeist of American cooking, though. That was black tea. because while Americans usually had green tea right from China, after the war, America and China weren't so friendly. As a result, they didn't share much either. They then started importing black tea from Sri Lanka and India, which was popularized as sweet tea in the South due to the insane amount of sugar and sometimes corn syrup they would add to this. It would be added hot, then served over ice, so it was really a great alternative to alcohol. It had everything you wanted in tea, and it worked really well if you added lemon into it too. Stuffed bell peppers were the kind of dish that made you feel like someone had tried. The bell peppers were hollowed out like tiny edible bowls and filled with a mix of ground beef, white rice, tomato sauce, onions, and a good handful of shredded cheddar cheese. They were lined up in a baking dish, covered with foil, and baked until everything was soft, steamy, and melted together. The peppers themselves went tender, almost sweet, and their edges browned just enough to feel special. It was one of those meals where the plate did all the work: meat, veg, starch, and cheese in one tidy package. You did not need a side dish. You barely needed silverware. Some people made theirs spicy. Some added Italian seasoning or swapped in turkey. But the soul of the dish was always the same. It was about making the most of what you had, about stretching a little ground meat into something that looked like more. In the 1980s, this was a dinner that meant you had taken the time, even when the truth was you whipped it up with leftovers. Stuffed bell peppers were edible proof that care could be baked into something simple. Home canning preserved summer abundance for winter tables when fresh produce was unavailable. Families maintained glass jars, lids, and rings used season after season. Gardens produced more than could be eaten fresh, and canning transformed surplus into provisions. Tomatoes became sauce, beans and peas filled jars, fruits became jams. The kitchen became a factory during harvest, with pots boiling and jars cooling. Children helped wash produce and carry products to cellar shelves. A well-stocked cellar meant winter wouldn't bring want. Families counted jars like savings accounts. The practice required knowledge passed through generations: processing times, sealing, techniques preventing spoilage. Peanut butter and onion sandwiches might sound like a dare, but in old rural churches, they were just another kind of honest food. You would slice a sweet white onion thin, Vidalia if you had it, and layer it between two slices of bread spread thick with peanut butter. No toasting, no grilling, just straight-up lunchbox material. Sometimes people added lettuce or mustard, but most stuck to the basic version. This odd little combination came from the South and made its way into handwritten cookbooks and potluck menus, usually with a note that read, "Do not knock it till you try it." These sandwiches were common among farming families and church workers who needed protein and flavor on the cheap. And they delivered. The sweetness of the peanut butter and the bite of the onion somehow worked together, especially when paired with a glass of sweet tea or a handful of pickles. They were not gourmet, but they were quick and filled a hole. And if you happen to grow up with them, there is a good chance you still crave one when no one is watching. Tomato surprises were hollowed-out tomatoes that had been stuffed with fillings you probably won't be able to guess, even if I pay you to. Hollowing out different kinds of vegetables, fruits, and peppers was a common and beloved culinary trend in America. But this was just taking things way too far. You know how some people just live for watching the world burn? I think whoever first came up with this recipe was the textbook definition of that personality type. For the atrocious fillings, you had tuna salad, shrimp salad, deviled ham, and eggs, and for the sweet ones, you had jellied fruit, cottage cheese, and whether or not you can believe it, marshmallows. It was actually considered a cocktail party snack at one point, and the entire idea behind naming it Tomato Surprises is that you really won't be able to tell what's in the damn thing. You'd be better off if you could, since then you'd know not to ever pick these up. Some foods should come with a warning, you know? Like, I get having creative party food, but you shouldn't sell your soul out just for that. Pork chops and applesauce might sound like something from the 1970s, but it had real staying power into the 1980s. It was the kind of meal that felt both retro and reliable. Pork chops, pan-fried in a little butter or oil, were the centerpiece. Thin cut or bone-in, sometimes breaded, sometimes not. They were not fancy, but when they were seasoned well and seared just right, they brought serious flavor. The applesauce came on the side, often from a jar, sweet and cold against the warmth of the meat. Some people thought it was strange, others thought it was genius. The sweet and savory contrast worked better than expected. It gave the dish balance, simplicity, a little surprise. If your mother grew up on it, chances are she passed it down without changing a thing. Pork chops and applesauce did not need a lot of ingredients or time. It needed a skillet, a jar, and a family willing to sit at the table together. That was the magic of it. Newspaper insulation turned yesterday's news into tomorrow's warmth without spending a cent on heating bills. Poor families discovered that wadded newspapers stuffed between walls, under doors, and around window frames created effective barriers against cold air. The paper's fibers trapped air pockets that slowed heat transfer. Children helped crumple pages while parents packed them into gaps around the house. Some families lined entire walls with newspaper before covering them with fabric. The hack extended beyond walls. Newspapers stuffed inside coats added warmth, and layered under mattresses kept cold from seeping up from unheated floors. The smell of old newsprint became associated with winter survival. What made this remarkable was how free materials became essential infrastructure. Families saved papers all year, knowing winter would require every sheet. Modern insulation costs thousands of dollars. Depression-era families achieved similar results with dedication and paper that would otherwise feed the fireplace. Carrot and pineapple casserole might raise eyebrows today, but in old church kitchens, it was a trusted crowd pleaser. You would shred carrots fine, mix them with drained canned pineapple, sugar, eggs, and a bit of butter, then top it all with crushed Ritz crackers before baking. The result was something between a side dish and a dessert. Warm, sweet, and just savory enough to sit next to a slice of ham or roast chicken. Southern church cookbooks especially loved this one. It showed up at Easter brunches, baby showers, and Wednesday night suppers. People liked it because it used simple ingredients in unexpected ways. Carrots were cheap, pineapple was shelf-stable, and crackers were almost always on hand. The casserole held its shape when sliced and looked cheerful with its orange-gold glow. Some added marshmallows. Others swore off that entirely. But no matter how you tweaked it, the base idea stayed the same. Make something warm, sweet, and comforting out of what was already in the pantry. And maybe that is why it stuck around so long, because even if it confused your taste buds, it made people smile. Poached carp in milk was a dish that incorporated freshwater carp, which can be a really wonderful thing to work with. That is, if you know what you're doing, which the inventor of this dish clearly didn't. You gently simmer the carp in milk, and sometimes you throw in onions, bay leaves, nutmeg, or parsley, but the method was essentially just for softening the strong taste of the fish. Carps just look gentle. When you get to eat them, they can be just as overwhelming as any kidney pie or liver-based dish. It was really common to see this in Scandinavian and Eastern European cooking, but those were much different times. Carp used to be something people also relied on when they wanted to do nutritious cooking, but slowly, the poor fish would find that the cards were stacked up against it. Carp is a muddy-tasting fish, and it doesn't have a lot of goodwill with people. It's seen as unappetizing and bony, and there also just aren't that many chefs who specialize in making the most out of carp. Plus, as developments in fishing kept increasing, there were more easier and delicious options like blue crabs, for example. Nobody ever complained about blue crabs. Also, no one liked their fish poached in milk. Who thought of that? Seriously? Tuna noodle casserole was either your favorite or your nightmare, but either way, it showed up often and meant you were home. The formula never changed. Egg noodles, canned tuna, frozen peas, and cream of mushroom soup all stirred together and baked until hot and thick. The finishing move? A crunchy crown of crushed potato chips, sometimes cornflakes, always something salty and golden. It came in a square dish that seemed bottomless. You would scoop out a portion and find yourself going back for more because it was weirdly addictive. Cheap, filling, and shelf-stable, it became the undisputed champion of weeknight meals for families trying to stretch $1. Some versions added chopped celery or onion. Others stayed true to the original, built on cans and carbs. It was a casserole that smelled like your grandmother's house. It could feed a family of 6 on pennies. And it tasted like a relic of a time when everything came from the pantry and nobody cared if the tuna was fancy. Homemade toys filled childhoods with play that cost parents nothing beyond imagination and available materials. Corncob dolls dressed in fabric scraps became beloved companions. Wooden spools strung together created pull toys that toddlers dragged across floors. Tin cans became drums, stilts, and telephones. Stick horses galloped through yards. Button spinners on string loops whirred hypnotically. Rag balls bounced well enough for endless games. Cardboard boxes transformed into forts, cars, and houses. Clothespin people populated miniature worlds. The toys lacked polish, but enabled creativity that manufactured toys often stifled. Children valued these creations because they participated in making them, understanding that entertainment didn't require store purchases. Parents recognized that imagination mattered more than plastic, and that children needed objects to manipulate more than objects to watch. Homemade toys represented love made tangible, time parents spent creating rather than money they spent buying. Savory bread pudding with celery and onions was not something you made to impress. It was what you made when there was stale bread, broth on hand, and mouths to feed. Cubed bread got soaked in seasoned broth or leftover gravy, then tossed with sautéed celery and onions before being baked until golden. The texture was soft inside with a crusty top, much like a stuffing but without needing a holiday as an excuse. It was often served as a side at Wednesday night potlucks, or as a light main on Lenten Fridays. Sometimes it had bits of cheese, sometimes not. It was flexible, forgiving, and made sense to people who hated waste. You would find this recipe tucked into the back pages of church cookbooks, often scribbled in with changes like, "Use mushroom soup if no broth." It was not flashy, but it was warm, satisfying, and made a quiet kind of sense. For cooks working with what they had, this dish was one more reminder that simple food can still taste like care. Another thing that was really exclusive to the 1970s was the country's rediscovered love for casseroles. Things like hot dog casseroles are just proof of this all around. But really, you had a casserole for just about every fruit, ingredient, and meat you had ever heard of. The deal with this one is that it was a cheap casserole and a super beginner-friendly one. Seriously, your nephew could make this if you gave him honest instructions and believed in him enough. I mean, what really is there to do? You just take the pasta and the hot dogs, layer them casserole style, and pop them in the oven. Bam, you're done. And now you have enough food to either share with the family twice over or enough to last you the entire day and then some. Casseroles were super easy to make, convenient, and usually affordable, but could be made with super fancy ingredients if you were feeling like pushing your wallet and could fit just about any taste palette in the entire country. That made them pretty damn hard to beat. Plus, the 70s was known for being a massive return-to-work culture and the grind lifestyle for a lot of Americans, so the need for big, easy, and simple dishes was major. Nowadays, there are a lot of convenient apps and services to do that for you, so there's no need to bother with things like casseroles every other day. Meatloaf with ketchup glaze was the definition of classic comfort, a slab of ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs, onions, and egg, then topped with a thick, sweet glaze of ketchup and brown sugar. It sat in a loaf pan, sizzling as the glaze caramelized in the oven, sending out smells that filled every corner of the house. It was never flashy, but it never needed to be. This was the kind of supper that could stretch a pound of ground beef into a meal for 6. Every slice was the same, moist, tender, and sticky on top. Some families added Worcestershire or mustard, others swore by keeping it simple. Either way, it was a permanent fixture of the 1980s dinner table. It was dependable, it was nostalgic, and it somehow got better the next day in a sandwich with a slice of white bread. Parents loved it because it was easy. Kids loved it because the glaze was basically candy. And even picky eaters found something to like. In an age of frozen meals and fast food, this was a hot meal that said someone still had time to care. Soap sliver pressing was the bathroom alchemy that ensured no fragment of purchased soap ever went to waste. When bar soap wore down to thin slivers too small to grip, families collected these scraps in jars kept near the sink. Once enough accumulated, mothers would wet the slivers and press them together firmly, molding them into new usable bars. Some heated the scraps in small amounts of water, then poured the mixture into molds to create uniform bars. Others simply pressed wet slivers onto new bars, fusing them together. Children learned this practice young, understanding that throwing away even the smallest soap piece meant wasting precious money. The recycled bars worked just as well as new ones, lathering and cleaning without any difference. This hack represented the fundamental philosophy of waste, nothing that governed poor households. A single purchased bar could effectively become 2 or 3 through careful sliver collection. The practice saved pennies that accumulated into dollars over months of bathroom thrift. Pickled pig's feet were a really common dish in the southern, Midwestern, and Appalachian areas, and they were even beloved by immigrant communities like the Pennsylvania Dutch. So why's this here? Despite the way that eating the entire pig was normalized in those regions and how cheap pigs' feet were, people soon began to get really tired of them. America as a whole started becoming a lot more curious about what lies outside of the typical practical cuisine they've cultivated. The cornbreads, the pig's feet, the chitlins, what else is out there? That's a big part of why offal and nose-to-tail eating started declining. There were also health concerns with pickled pig's feet. They're really high in fat and sodium, and as we got closer and closer to the 21st century, that became too much of a no-no for most people. It's still Southern soul food, and some people make it out of tradition anyway, but it's largely just fallen into irrelevancy. Barbecue meatballs over rice was sticky, sweet, and surprisingly elegant for something made with grape jelly. The meatballs were simple: ground beef, breadcrumbs, egg, maybe a dash of onion or garlic powder. Rolled, baked, and then dropped into a bubbling pot of barbecue sauce. Sometimes that sauce was just bottled barbecue. Sometimes it was a wild mix of ketchup, jelly, and mustard that should not have worked, but somehow always did. The sauce coated the meatballs in a glaze so thick, it practically begged for a bed of white rice to soak it all up. This was not party food. It was Tuesday night food that tasted like a celebration. It was filling, sticky in the best way, and so easy to make ahead. Families loved it because it used cheap ingredients. Kids loved it because it tasted like candy in dinner form. It looked like something you would get at a church supper or potluck served from a giant aluminum tray. But at home, it meant something a little more personal. It meant comfort. Vinegar cleaning solutions replaced every commercial cleaning product with one inexpensive pantry staple that worked on nearly everything. Poor families discovered that white vinegar cut grease, removed stains, cleaned glass, eliminated odors, and disinfected surfaces without requiring different products for different jobs. Mixed with water in various strengths, vinegar tackled bathroom grime, kitchen splatter, and floor dirt equally well. The sharp smell faded quickly, leaving surfaces clean. Mothers kept spray bottles or rags soaked in vinegar solution ready for daily cleaning. Windows sparkled when wiped with vinegar and newspaper, requiring no expensive glass cleaners. The acid dissolved mineral deposits in kettles and around faucets. Children learned early that the cleaning cabinet needed only vinegar and perhaps baking soda for stubborn jobs. A gallon of vinegar costing cents replaced dozens of specialized products costing dollars each. The simplicity was the genius. One solution for everything meant one expense for cleaning. Ground beef and apple casserole was one of those strange, sweet-savory combinations that actually worked when it was done right. You would brown the beef with onions, layer it with sliced apples, and season the whole thing with a blend of salt, pepper, and sometimes a pinch of cinnamon or sage. Then it baked until the apples softened and the beef browned at the edges. It was not quite a pie, not quite a meatloaf, but somewhere in between. This dish showed up often in church cookbooks from the Midwest, where apples were abundant and beef was often stretched with whatever could be found. It had a rustic charm and felt like supper from another century. Sometimes breadcrumbs or oats were used to soak up the juices. Other times, a few potatoes filled in the gaps. You would not expect it to work, but once it was on your plate, it made quiet sense. It tasted like fall, like harvest, and like someone trying to make do with just enough. Let's start with a dish that might sound like a dare: beef tongue stew. I can tell you before you wrinkle your nose, this was the kind of meal that made families sit up and ask for seconds. Beef tongue simmers low and slow with onions, carrots, and potatoes, becoming tender slices of savory goodness. Pot roast with a little extra, "wow, really?" on the side, basically. The beef tongue was a budget-friendly protein back in the day and didn't skimp on flavor. When you were trying to stretch a meal without sacrificing heartiness, it was a kitchen MVP for Sunday suppers. The trick was boiling the tongue until tender, peeling off the outer skin, not as gross as it sounds, I promise, and letting the tongue soak up the rich, brothy stew. When people started preferring prepackaged convenience over kitchen craftiness, this dish fell off the map. Beef tongue stew is a culinary throwback, but if you can find a tongue at your butcher or muster the courage to try one, then it's worth exploring. It's earthy, tender, and the sort of meal that makes you feel tied to a simpler, thriftier time. Who knows? It could become your next Sunday's favorite. Pepper steak stir-fry was how families tried to recreate the magic of Chinese takeout without picking up the phone. Thin strips of beef were browned quickly in oil, then tossed with sliced bell peppers, onions, and a sauce made from soy, garlic, and a touch of cornstarch. It cooked fast, filled the house with savory aromas, and tasted bold and fresh even when made with basic ingredients. This was the 1980s version of a home-cooked stir-fry, simple, satisfying, and endlessly adaptable. Some added mushrooms, some tossed in a handful of bean sprouts or water chestnuts. But at its core, pepper steak was all about the beef and the peppers. The sauce thickened just enough to coat every piece, and it all got spooned over a mound of white rice, steaming and soft. It felt like a restaurant dish, without the price tag or the wait. Pepper steak stir-fry made dinner feel like an occasion. It gave families something new to try, without straying too far from what they knew. And most importantly, it brought everyone to the table. Egg carton seed starters transformed breakfast packaging into springtime nurseries that launched gardens without spending money on commercial planters. Each cup in a cardboard egg carton became a perfect container for starting seeds indoors before transplanting season. Families filled cups with soil, planted seeds, and placed cartons in sunny windows where warmth encouraged germination. The cardboard retained moisture while allowing drainage, and when seedlings grew strong, entire cups could be planted directly in ground where they decomposed naturally. The system cost nothing beyond seeds, often saved from previous harvests, and soil from the yard. Children participated eagerly, watching assigned cups for first sprouts and learning patience alongside botany. The practice extended growing seasons and gave families head starts on vegetables that would feed them through summer. Egg cartons that would otherwise become trash became tools for food production, embodying the principle that everything had potential use. Cornmeal dumplings over stewed tomatoes were the kind of meatless meal that still filled you up and stuck to your bones. You would make the stewed tomatoes first, fresh or canned, simmered down with onion, sugar, and maybe a splash of vinegar for balance. Then you would drop spoonfuls of a cornmeal batter right on top, cover the pot, and let the steam puff them up like little yellow clouds. This was Depression-era food, no doubt about it, but it carried on through the 1940s and 1950s in Southern church kitchens. It was warm, bright, and comforting in a strange way. The cornmeal dumplings were cheap to make and stretched the tomatoes into something hearty enough to count as supper. Church ladies brought it to meatless Monday dinners or served it at home when payday was still a few days off. You would not find steak in a dish like this, but you would find a kind of quiet resilience. Even when cupboards were nearly bare, meals like this proved you could still sit down and feel taken care of. You just needed cornmeal, tomatoes, and a little bit of hope. Chicken divan was the queen of creamy casseroles, a dish that somehow made broccoli feel like a luxury. Families would pile cooked chicken and steamed broccoli into a baking dish, then drown it in a sauce made from cream of chicken soup, a splash of sherry, and a heaping handful of shredded cheddar. It was finished with golden breadcrumbs and baked until bubbling. The name made it sound fancy, but it was pure 1980s comfort food, easy, affordable, and surprisingly rich. It could be made ahead of time, frozen, or doubled for potlucks. If your mother was trying to impress dinner guests without working too hard, this was what she made. Kids might have rolled their eyes at the broccoli, but by the second bite, nobody was complaining. The creaminess covered everything. Even if you hated vegetables, you liked this. It was the dish that made your mother feel like she was serving fine dining even when it came out of a can. Rubber band saving created stretchy treasure hoards that eliminated the need to ever purchase these small but useful items. Every rubber band that arrived wrapped around newspapers, produce, or mail was carefully removed and added to growing balls or stored in jars. The collections grew surprisingly large, providing bands whenever needed for sealing bags, bundling items, or creating makeshift repairs. Children contributed to the collection, understanding that even these tiny items cost money at stores. The rubber band ball became a fixture in kitchen drawers and workshop benches. Some families sorted by size, keeping different collections for different purposes. The practice extended rubber band life through careful use, never stretching beyond necessity, storing away from heat that caused brittleness. What seemed like obsessive hoarding was actually practical economics. Over years, the saved bands represented real money never spent, proving that wealth accumulated through countless small decisions to save rather than discard. Mushroom-stuffed zucchini boats were the kind of creative supper dish you made when the garden was exploding and meat was nowhere in sight. You would have a zucchini lengthwise, scoop out the center, and fill it with a mixture of breadcrumbs, chopped mushroom, and maybe a little cheese or egg to hold it all together. Then you would bake it until the tops turned golden and the zucchini softened just enough to cut with a fork. This was not just about flavor. It was about making something look special when times were not. Church ladies loved how pretty they looked on a plate, especially for luncheons or potlucks where presentation counted. It was also a sneaky way to use up vegetables that were about to turn, or mushrooms that came out of a can and needed a little help. Sometimes a spoonful of tomato sauce got added on top. Sometimes the breadcrumbs were stale crackers crushed by hand. Whatever you had went in, and that was the rule. These zucchini boats sailed straight out of the garden and onto the church table with quiet pride. And for those who remember them, they were a summer supper worth repeating. Chicken and rice. Bake with cream of mushroom soup was the casserole that cooked while you did anything else. Dump a few boneless chicken breasts into a baking dish. Add white rice, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and some water or broth. Stir, cover, bake. That was it. The rice soaked up all the flavor from the soup and the chicken, turning soft and creamy while the top browned just enough to give it texture. You would take off the foil and suddenly, dinner was ready. It did not ask for attention. It just quietly got the job done. If your parents worked long hours, this was the kind of meal that waited patiently in the oven. It was never flashy, but it was always there. It fed everyone at the table, left you full, and saved your family from another night of fast food. Chicken and rice bake was not about bold flavors or eye-catching colors. It was about consistency. It was about stretching a few cans and a handful of rice into something warm and whole. And somehow, it always worked. Cooking fuel conservation stretched limited wood, coal, or gas supplies through techniques that maximized heat use. Families planned meals to cook multiple dishes simultaneously, filling ovens completely whenever lit. Retained heat finished cooking after fuel stopped. Pots wrapped in towels continued simmering without additional energy. Pressure cookers reduced cooking times dramatically, using fractions of fuel that conventional methods required. Hay boxes, insulated containers where hot pots sat covered, completed cooking through retained heat alone. Families ate more cold meals in summer, reserving fuel for heating seasons. Children gathered kindling daily, understanding fuel represented precious money or exhausting labor. Efficient stoves replaced wasteful models when possible, and dampers were adjusted constantly to balance heat and consumption. The practice taught awareness of energy costs that modern abundant utilities have erased. Every flame represented resources that wasting meant wasting family security. Sweet potato and apple skillet was the kind of dish that made fall feel like a warm quilt on your lap. You would slice sweet potatoes and apples, lay them in a cast iron skillet, and cook them slowly with pork drippings, a little brown sugar, and cinnamon. The edges would caramelize while the centers turned soft and buttery. It was sweet enough to feel like dessert, but savory enough to sit next to pork chops or baked ham. This was common fare in southern church kitchens, especially during harvest dinners or homecoming meals when local produce was everywhere. Apples came from backyard trees and sweet potatoes from the garden rows. Church ladies cooked them up in big skillets passed down through generations. No baking dish, no timer, just watch and stir until it looked right. This dish was loved for its flavor and its flexibility. It could be breakfast, supper, or anything in between. And when the wind started to blow through the trees and the daylight slipped away early, it was the kind of meal that made everything feel a little more peaceful. Taco salad in a Doritos bag was the definition of fun food, half salad, half chaos, and all 1980s genius. The setup was simple. Ground beef cooked with taco seasoning, shredded lettuce, cheddar cheese, maybe some diced tomatoes or sour cream, and a big handful of nacho cheese Doritos. Some families mixed it all in a bowl. Others, the bold ones, served it straight from the bag. You would crunch up the chips, pour in the toppings, shake it up, and dig in with a fork. It was portable. It was messy. It was delicious. And it felt like breaking the rules in the best way. This was dinner that did not sit properly on a plate. It made kids excited to eat salad. It gave busy parents a break. And it tasted like everything good about the 1980s. Salty, cheesy, just a little bit ridiculous. You could call it a meal, a snack, or a party trick. But however it showed up, it never lasted long. Taco salad in a Doritos bag was food with a wink. Growing food from scraps turned kitchen waste into productive plants that supplemented grocery purchases with homegrown produce. Potato eyes cut from peels and planted in soil produced new potato plants. Onion bottoms placed in water sprouted roots that could be transplanted. Carrot tops grown in dishes produced fresh greens for salads. Celery bases regenerated entire new stalks when placed in water then soil. Green onion roots regrew repeatedly when kept in windowsill glasses. The practice required no seed purchases, only patience and attention. Children watched, fascinated, as garbage transformed into growing plants, learning that life persisted in ways not immediately obvious. The regrown vegetables might be smaller than store-bought, but they cost nothing and provided fresh produce when budgets allowed none. Kitchen windowsills became tiny farms, lined with containers of regenerating scraps. The practice represented ultimate thrift, creating food from what would otherwise become compost. Tomato aspic with hard-boiled eggs might sound like a dare today, but it once stood tall as a respected church supper dish. Made by mixing tomato juice with gelatin, celery, seasonings, and sometimes vinegar, it was poured into molds and set until firm. Sliced hard-boiled eggs were arranged inside or on top, often with a sprig of parsley or a ring of olives. It was served cold, cut into wedges or squares, and laid out next to the casseroles and ham loaf like it belonged there, which, at the time, it absolutely did. This was not dessert. It was a savory salad, and it showed up at luncheons and wedding showers across the South and Midwest. Some loved the bright tang and chilled texture. Others ate around it politely. But back then, it was seen as elegant, colorful, and even health-conscious. You would not find many fans of it now, but ask anyone who lived through the 1950s, and they will tell you. It was just what people did. Spaghetti with Italian sausage was how pasta night grew up in the 1980s. It was a step above plain marinara, a little richer, a little more rustic. Italian sausage, mild or spicy, was browned and broken up into chunky pieces, then simmered in red sauce until every bite was soaked in flavor. The sauce took on the fennel and garlic from the meat. It clung to the spaghetti like it belonged there. This was not a kid's dinner. It was messy, bold, and made you want to mop the plate with a piece of bread when it was done. Parmesan on top was a must. Sometimes fresh basil, if you were lucky. It was hearty enough to count as a full meal. No side dishes needed. Parents loved it because it was quick and satisfying. Teenagers loved it because it tasted like something you would order at a restaurant. Even if you used jarred sauce and boxed noodles, the sausage made it feel special. This was dinner that made noise, from the sizzle of the pan to the scrape of forks at the end. Spaghetti with Italian sausage was not just food, it was the soundtrack of real family meals. Patching worn fabric extended clothing life far beyond original expectations through careful repair that honored every garment. When knees wore through pants or elbows thinned in shirts, families didn't discard, they patched. Fabric scraps saved from worn-out clothing became repair material for items still serviceable. Patches were cut larger than holes, edges turned under and stitched firmly in place. Some families made patches decorative, using contrasting fabrics or embroidery to transform repairs into design elements. Children's play clothes accumulated patches upon patches, becoming more repair than original fabric. The practice required keeping fabric scraps organized by color and weight, ready when repairs became necessary. What mattered wasn't appearance but function. Clothes that still covered and protected bodies served their purpose regardless of patches. The practice taught that clothing was investment to be maintained, not disposable items replaced at first signs of wear. Rice and chicken liver bake was once a staple in kitchens that knew how to make the most of every part of the bird. You would saute chicken livers with onion and a bit of celery, stir in uncooked rice, broth, and whatever herbs you had, then bake the whole thing until the rice fluffed up and the livers turned tender. It was hearty, savory, and filled the house with a smell that some loved and others, well, got used to. Chicken liver was cheap, packed with iron, and often overlooked by those who could afford to be picky. But church families and frugal cooks knew better. They turned it into something warm and filling, especially in the Midwest and South where rice casseroles were king. The dish was often brought to potlucks or family gatherings, sometimes with a side of peas or stewed apples to lighten things up. It may not have looked glamorous, but it fed a crowd and cost next to nothing. And in communities where food was about nourishment and care more than trendiness, that was enough. You might not crave it now, but back then, it was dinner. Macaroni and cheese with hot dogs was childhood in a bowl. You started with Kraft or Velveeta, stirred it until the cheese sauce turned bright orange and glossy, then dropped in sliced hot dogs and let the magic happen. It was salty, it was creamy, and it was a guaranteed win with kids who were otherwise impossible to feed. Some families added ketchup, some added peas. But most just kept it simple and let the cheese and dogs do all the work. It came together in 15 minutes. It cost next to nothing, and it felt like a reward at the end of the day. You could eat it on the couch, at the table, or straight from the pot. There were no rules. It was the dinner that babysitters made, that exhausted parents relied on, that kids learned to cook for themselves. It was not fancy, but it was honest. And that is what made it last. Macaroni and cheese with hot dogs was a dish that knew exactly what it was and never tried to be anything else. Cottage cheese and noodle casserole was a quiet staple in church kitchens that knew how to stretch a dollar without making anyone feel shortchanged. You would take cooked egg noodles and mix them with cottage cheese, eggs, butter, and a little salt and pepper. Sometimes there was sour cream, sometimes not. Then you would bake it until it set like a pudding and browned just slightly on top. It was a little tangy, a little rich, and very filling. In Jewish communities, this was known as kugel, but versions of it made their way into Christian church cookbooks throughout the Midwest. It was meatless, which made it perfect for Lent or budget nights when meat just was not going to happen. Some folks added raisins, others shredded carrots or spinach, but the base never changed. You could serve it hot or cold, and leftovers were often better the next day. It was not a flashy dish, but it always disappeared by the end of a potluck. Sometimes the best suppers were the ones that came out of a mixing bowl and a prayer. Swiss chicken bake was the kind of casserole that came out of nowhere and took over every potluck and weeknight dinner table. You took chicken breasts, boneless, skinless, and layered them in a baking dish. Then came slices of Swiss cheese, melted right on top. Over that, you poured cream of chicken soup mixed with a splash of milk or sour cream. But the real finishing move? A thick blanket of seasoned stuffing from a box, spread over everything like a crunchy, buttery crown. the whole thing baked until bubbling, the top golden and crisp, the chicken tender and juicy underneath. It looked simple. It tasted like something a diner would charge extra for. The flavors were rich and satisfying, with just enough sharpness from the Swiss to keep you coming back. It was fast, filling, and felt like a real meal, even when it came straight from cans and packages. In the 1980s, that was the magic. You did not need to make everything from scratch. You just needed to make something everyone wanted to eat. Swiss chicken bake was that dish, humble, heavy, and completely unforgettable. Macaroni loaf with tomato glaze was how you made pasta behave like meatloaf when times got tight. Cooked elbow macaroni was mixed with beaten eggs, milk, breadcrumbs, and a bit of ground meat or cheese if you had it, then packed into a loaf pan. A glaze of ketchup or seasoned tomato sauce went on top before baking. Once cooled slightly, it could be sliced clean, like a loaf of bread, and served warm or at room temperature. It was ideal for church luncheons and picnics, sturdy, filling, and easy to portion out. This recipe was especially handy in times when pasta was cheap and meat was not. Some versions went all vegetarian, relying on spices and a heavy hand of cheese to make up the difference. It was not flashy, but it looked neat on a plate and always seemed to stretch just a little farther than expected. Breakfast for dinner pancake night was when the rules went out the window and everyone got exactly what they wanted. There was no need for vegetables, no guilt about syrup, just stacks of fluffy pancakes, sizzling sausage links, and a pile of scrambled eggs, served in the evening like it was Sunday morning. It felt like cheating in the best possible way. Some families added hash browns or bacon. Others kept it simple with just pancakes and butter. Either way, it was a meal that made everyone smile. You could make it in 30 minutes or less using boxed pancake mix and whatever breakfast meat was in the fridge. It was affordable, it was easy, and it felt like a reward. Kids loved it because it tasted like vacation. Parents loved it because nobody complained. Pancake night was not about nutrition. It was about nostalgia. It was about making dinner feel like something to look forward to. Teaching children frugality ensured money-saving wisdom passed to generations facing their own hard times. Parents explained every saving choice, transforming daily life into education. Children participated in household economy, understanding why lights were turned off, why waste was forbidden. They learned to find value in discarded items. Lessons came through example. Children watched parents practice what they preached. Chores taught that labor had value. The education prepared children for economic challenges, carrying forward knowledge that prosperity obscures. These lessons represented the ultimate hack, ensuring wisdom survived beyond the generation that learned it. Cornflake-crusted baked chicken thighs were how you added crunch and comfort without using a drop of oil. Chicken thighs, bone in, skin on, were dipped in milk or beaten egg, rolled in crushed cornflakes, and baked until crisp and golden. The coating gave it that fried texture everyone loved, but it was made right in the oven, no skillet or grease needed. This recipe came from home cooks looking for thrift, and it landed in nearly every church cookbook between the 1960s and 1980s. Cornflakes were cheap, stored well, and gave leftover chicken a new lease on life. Some versions added paprika or garlic powder, others kept it plain. Either way, it was a weeknight workhorse and a potluck favorite. It tasted good hot or cold, which made it ideal for church picnics and choir practices. Kids liked the crunch, adults liked the simplicity, and everyone liked how easy it was to pull together on a budget. Fish stick supper was the dependable fallback that no one ever really admitted they loved, yet everyone secretly looked forward to. Pulled from the freezer, lined up on a tray and baked until golden, those crispy little rectangles of breaded fish were the closest most kids came to seafood in the 1980s. They were always served with a scoop of boxed mashed potatoes and a side of canned peas, maybe drowned in butter if you were lucky. The tartar sauce came from a jar. The fish sticks came in bulk, but the meal somehow worked. It was crisp, soft, salty, and sweet all at once. You could eat it in 20 minutes flat, clean up in 10, and still have time for a rerun before bed. It was not gourmet, but it was familiar. dependable, safe, and sometimes that was more than enough. Parents loved it because it was foolproof. Kids loved it because it felt like fast food at home. It did not win awards, but it won weeknights. Fish stick supper was not trying to impress. It was trying to make dinner happen. And in the 1980s, that was the goal. Meal stretching with fillers turned small amounts of expensive ingredients into dishes feeding large families. Breadcrumbs extended meatloaf, making 1 pound feed 8. Oatmeal bulked up ground beef. Rice and beans created complete protein without meat costs. Potatoes appeared at every meal. Gravy stretched meat flavor across plates. Soups started with bones, then filled with vegetables until thin liquid became stew. The practice required understanding which combinations provided complete meals cheaply. Mothers calculated portions mentally, knowing exactly how far ingredients could stretch. Children ate filling meals without realizing how little expensive food they contained. Cheddar and onion pie was a sharp, savory answer to the kinds of meals that had to satisfy without meat. Thinly sliced onions were cooked down until soft and golden, then layered in a pie crust with shredded cheddar cheese and beaten eggs. Once baked, the filling was creamy and rich, with a bite from the onion and a salty tang from the cheese. This pie was often served with tomato soup or sliced cucumber salad and found its place on Lenten menus or meatless Friday tables. It was simple enough for a weeknight, but impressive enough for a church potluck. The ingredients were easy to find, and the flavors were bold enough to stand on their own. Women's auxiliaries swore by it, and it held its own alongside quiches and casseroles and hand-typed recipe collections passed around at coffee hour. It was humble but confident, and always disappeared faster than expected. Turkey tetrazzini was the casserole that came to the rescue after every major holiday, when your fridge was full of turkey but nobody wanted another sandwich. It started with chopped leftover turkey, cooked spaghetti noodles, and a creamy sauce made from butter, broth, and sometimes cream of mushroom soup. Toss in some peas, maybe a few mushrooms, and top it all with a scattering of breadcrumbs or shredded cheese. Into the oven it went, baking into a golden, bubbly casserole that felt nothing like leftovers. It turned scraps into supper. It made the most of what you had and made it feel like a new meal altogether. Some families made it from scratch, others relied on shortcuts. But the result was the same: something warm, rich, and totally satisfying. Turkey tetrazzini did not try to be trendy. It just tried to make your holiday leftovers go a little farther. And in that, it succeeded beautifully. It was one of those dishes that you only remembered after Thanksgiving, but once it hit the table, it felt like it had always been part of the plan. Cowpea stew is another example of how black-eyed peas are a cultural pillar of many communities, especially the American South. It was such a common thing to see in family cookbooks, community cookbooks, and even the government pushed for people to start using more of this. Cowpea stew would typically just look like the black-eyed peas and a little bit of fat just for flavor. People used vegetables such as onions and garlic, carrots or potatoes, and then herbs like parsley and thyme. Dried black-eyed peas were also something that was not only available in bulk, but was also something that was really commonly grown throughout the South. Lots of places that had farming land or had traditions of growing their own food were living marginally better during the Depression because of how they were used to treating food the way people were starting to. Conservatively, with intention and planning, cowpea stew was actually a special dish because it was one of the few things that didn't feel like you were stretching it. Lots of the stuff on here, like potato peel soups and lard with toast, that kind of stuff really was tiring for people to eat all the time. Cowpea stew wasn't just affordable and accessible, it was delicious and healthy, which made it a real star during this entire decade. Chicken broccoli rice casserole was the golden trio of 1980s casseroles, all packed into one dish. It started with cooked chicken, usually leftover or pulled from a can. Then came frozen broccoli, thawed just enough to mix in. Add a cup of uncooked minute rice, pour in a can of cream of chicken or mushroom soup, and stir it all together with a fistful of shredded cheddar. Into the oven it went, and out came a creamy, cheesy, one-pan miracle. The rice puffed up, the cheese melted, and the broccoli softened just enough to make everyone feel like they were eating something healthy. It was simple, satisfying, and endlessly adaptable. You could make it ahead, you could freeze it, you could double it and feed an army. Chicken broccoli rice casserole was not trying to win any awards. It was trying to get dinner on the table and still have everyone walk away happy. And most nights, it did exactly that. Bartering and trading replaced cash when money was scarce but skills remained plentiful. Families exchanged labor, produce, and handmade items without currency. Eggs traded for bread. Babysitting exchanged for vegetables. Haircuts traded for repairs. The practice built community while stretching limited cash. Children learned value existed beyond money. Skills created wealth even when accounts sat empty. Churches facilitated exchanges where needs met abilities. The practice required trust. Taking advantage destroyed relationships. Communities with strong bartering survived depressions, while isolated families struggled. Economy meant more than money alone. Pizza burgers were what happened when your parents could not decide between sandwiches and slices. You started with seasoned ground beef, browned in a skillet. Then you stirred in a little pizza sauce, jarred or homemade, and maybe a dash of oregano or garlic. This mixture got spooned onto halved hamburger buns, topped with shredded mozzarella, and popped into the oven until bubbly and golden. The result was somewhere between Sloppy Joe and open-faced pizza, and it was magic. Kids loved them because they were messy. Parents loved them because they were cheap, fast, and crowd-pleasing. They showed up in school cafeterias, weeknight dinners, and sometimes even birthday parties. You could dress them up with pepperoni, green peppers, or mushrooms, or keep them plain and classic. Gift wrap, reusing saved paper, ribbons, and bows from received presents for future occasions. Children learned to open gifts carefully, preserving wrapping for mothers to smooth and store. Ribbon was wound onto cardboard. Bows were stored for future packages. The practice meant never buying wrapping while still presenting beautiful gifts. Tissue paper was refolded multiple times. Gift bags circulated for years. Brown paper bags became wrapping when decorated. Newspaper comics wrapped children's gifts colorfully. The practice taught that presentation didn't require expense. Saving wrap was practical. Vegetarian chili definitely had its heyday in the same time as those moments I was talking about. Listen, when I say movement, I don't mean a 3-day bandwagon full of peaceful sit-ins and protests like we have today. I mean, like nationally, parents everywhere were livid. They couldn't stand that their kids were actually preferring to stay inside with a McDonald's Happy Meal and the television screen, and lots of them became super proactive about their family's diet and eating habits because of the massive revamp in culture. I mean, in this same century, these people went from surviving off of foraging wild mushrooms to watching moving pictures on a screen, having a magic box that just cools all their food full-time, slow cookers, the internet, computers, and God knows what else. All this to say, it was a fast-paced era, and people reacted with what they knew worked: vegetables. If the Depression proved anything, it was that there was a massive problem with people's diets. It wasn't economical, and it definitely wasn't healthy, and the alternative wasn't as impossible to switch to as most people would have you believe. Circumstances like this saw the rise of vegetarian chili and vegan cookbooks, but unfortunately, it couldn't make the cut, especially in the South, where people just outright rejected it. Stuffed baked apples were one of those meals that towed the line between dinner and dessert. Apples stored well through winter, and rice was cheap, filling, and easy to cook. Together, they made something practical and gently sweet. You hollowed an apple, stuffed it with cooked rice, and baked it until it softened and started to collapse. If you had cinnamon or brown sugar, great. If not, a pat of lard did the trick. Some added milk to make it creamier. It was not fancy or meant to impress, but it filled stomachs and made children smile. In a time where smiles were hard to come by, that counted. These apples were often served after a bowl of soup or beans as a way to end on something soft. They warmed the kitchen and reminded folks that even hard times had gentle endings. Yes, you read that right. This sounds like a dare, but it was once a quirky staple in Depression-era kitchens. Simple, affordable ingredients, cabbage and peanut butter rolls, were combined in a way that's unexpected but also surprisingly delicious if you give it a chance. Here's how it worked. Blanched large cabbage leaves were then spread with creamy peanut butter. The leaves were rolled up tight like little cabbage burritos and baked to soften and meld the flavors. The result? Oddly satisfying and packed with protein, a savory sweet combo that was perfect for families scraping by. Peanut butter was filling and hearty, and cabbage was cheap and plentiful, so everyone could get through another long day. In fact, some recipes included a drizzle of molasses or honey for extra sweetness. When times were tough, creativity like this filled plates and bellies. It may not sound like a five-star dish. Today, these rolls might be a curiosity, but they are a testament to the ingenuity of past generations. You may not see cabbage and peanut butter rolls on any menus these days, but there's no reason they couldn't be an oddball appetizer at your next retro dinner party. It'll be a conversation starter at least, if nothing else. Savory pumpkin casserole reminded folks that pumpkin was not just for pies. Canned or fresh pumpkin got mixed with sautéed onions, sage, and breadcrumbs or crushed crackers, then baked until firm and golden. Some added grated cheese, others just let the herbs carry the flavor. This dish often showed up at fall festivals, Thanksgiving potlucks, or women's fellowship dinners where seasonal ingredients were the star. It was warm, earthy, and just a little sweet, depending on how you seasoned it. The texture was somewhere between a stuffing and a spoon bread, and it paired well with ham or roast chicken. It was thrifty, flavorful, and surprisingly cozy. Church ladies brought it to the table as a reminder that canned pumpkin could be more than dessert. Here's a dish that's actually something that'll get you feeling all warm and fuzzy. After all, what else does a good chiffon cake do? And there's no better one than coconut chiffon cakes. These started becoming popular in the late 1920s, and the earliest reference I could find was of Harry Baker, who kept a secret recipe for 20 years before it finally became public in the 1940s. Before he decided to share his secrets with the wider world, most cakes were pretty heavy and required a lot of batter. That wasn't really to the liking of the upper class, especially when we talk about Hollywood stars who Henry was known to work for. They preferred foreign styles of making cakes, and especially in Europe, chiffon cakes were really popular. Henry got a solid grip on the dish because he prepared so many of them for their special events, and eventually, he developed a perfect recipe that even General Mills had their eye on. When they did get it, they started promoting it in their Betty Crocker recipes, which was a surefire way to bring the cake into the mainstream. That's some real commitment to the bit. But his recipe was sought after because even despite how chiffon cake is naturally a pretty light and airy cake, his was like a floating cloud with the best parts of coconut milk and extract. Also, the shredded coconut on top and the cream of tartar really gave it that finishing touch. Yeah, beef and pickle hot dish might sound odd at first, but it was a beloved staple in old Lutheran cookbooks across the Midwest. Ground beef was browned and mixed with elbow macaroni, cream of mushroom soup, and chopped dill pickles. The tang of the pickles cut through the richness, adding just enough brightness to keep things interesting. This casserole was baked until bubbly, then topped with crispy onions or crushed crackers depending on what was in the pantry. It was easy to make, easy to serve, and oddly satisfying. It fed a lot of people without needing much meat, which made it perfect for potlucks and budget nights. Once you tried it, it stuck with you. Right? You know, guys back in the day used to hunt feral pigs and make wild boar shoulder roasts out of them. Nowadays, they listen to Andrew Tate. You gotta start wondering where we went wrong with everything. No, but really, wild boar shoulder roasts were a thing. And not only were they a thing with a lot of historical and culinary reference. So basically, a super important thing. The dish was a heritage of regional cooking that blended the best and most practical parts of Southern and Native American influences. Wild boars aren't something that were native to America, and indigenous people were the ones who were the most proficient hunters. They were also the ones who did the most experimenting and found out that things like smoking and roasting work really well here. You might think, but if they aren't native, how come so many are there in the South? Well, That has to do with how boars were introduced by Spanish explorers in the 1500s. Basically, those boars had escaped into the southern side of the country, and that's why you see so many in the south. Wild boar became a sign of bounty and became associated with feasts, holidays, and eventually roasts. But we've really moved away from hunting as a country. Well, you'll ask me next, what do we do when we need rags then? If you have any shirts you don't use that don't fit, and ones you can't even pass on as hand-me-downs, then you know what to do. Use your old t-shirts as rags and repurpose them instead of going out and spending an unnecessarily high amount on a bundle pack of 5 with differently colored rags. You just need to clean filth off of the floor, and you can do that with anything. All of it is going to end up the same kind of dirty, even if one looks fresher and the other doesn't. Which poor man's supper from the past would you bring back to your table tonight? Share your family's survival recipes in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe so you never miss more forgotten meals worth reviving.